Piping systems are logical entities that facilitate calculations for flow and sizing of piping. Piping systems can be created in two ways. One way is to simply add pipe to connect the waterside components, and they will automatically be added to a piping system. The other way is to select the components and manually add them to a system. Then you can have Revit generate and lay out the piping. In this example, we'll cover the steps to manually create a piping system. A piping system consists of one or several target connectors and one source connector. However, you do not have to specify the source connector. For example, you would think that a source connector in a piping system would be a pump. But in this design, each water source heat pump has an integrated pump, and you can only have one source connector. So we can specify the cooling tower as the source connector, since the cooling tower must handle the load of each water source heat pump. We will create two piping systems, a condenser water supply and a condenser water return system. Each water source heat pump has a supply and return connector. Those connectors will be the target connectors, and the supply and return connectors on the cooling tower will be the source connectors. To create a piping system, I'll first select a water source heat pump. When I do, the ribbon changes to the Modify Mechanical Equipment contextual ribbon. On the Create Systems panel, I'll select Piping. Revit displays the Create Piping System dialog. Here, you can select the system type and give the system a name. By default, there are several system types for pipe, such as domestic, fire protection, hydronic, sanitary, and vent. However, you can create custom system types to handle the needs of the waterside systems in your project. When I expand the System Type drop-down, you can see the available system types that this heat pump can belong to. The system types appear because there are pipe connectors placed on the equipment family that are assigned to these types. I will choose hydronic supply. You can also select whether or not to open the system in the system editor. I'll leave this checkbox cleared and name the system CWS for condenser water supply. Then I'll click OK. When I do, the system is created, but only the one heat pump is added to the system at this point. In the contextual ribbon, I'll click Edit System. Revit enters into Edit Piping System mode, and everything on the screen goes dim except for the components in the piping system. Also, Add to System is selected by default in the Edit Piping System panel of the contextual ribbon. So I can begin selecting components with target connectors to add to the system. As you can see, each time I select a water source heat pump, the element becomes bold and I can easily see which components I have selected. If I select a component by mistake, I can select Remove From System in the contextual ribbon and then select a component to remove. You can also use a window selection to select multiple components at once. Once all the target components have been selected, I can select the source component by clicking Select Equipment in the Edit Piping System panel of the contextual ribbon. With this tool active, I'll select the cooling tower. Pay attention to what happens when I select the cooling tower. A Select Connector dialog appears. This is because there are multiple hydronic supply pipe connectors placed on this family. You can only use one connector on a single piece of equipment per piping system, whether it's a target or source connector. I will select the first one and then click OK. Realize that I can no longer select the cooling tower now to add the other hydronic supply connector. This is not a problem though. I can still connect pipe from this system to it later. With the equipment selected, the System Equipment drop-down in the Options bar now displays the mechanical equipment element that I just selected. With all the components selected, I'll click Finish Editing System. Now, when I select one of the heat pumps that belong to the piping system, two contextual ribbons display. Looking in the Properties palette, you can see the system name under the Mechanical section. If you had several piping systems created, you may forget what equipment is part of which system. I'll switch to the Piping Systems contextual ribbon. Now the Properties palette populates with the system properties. In the ribbon, in the System Tools panel, you can see the system name in the System selector. Also, if you want to edit the system, you can select Edit System to return to Edit Piping System mode. Additionally, if you had not selected the source connector or equipment for the system, you could choose Select Equipment now in order to do so. And if you wanted to disconnect the equipment from the system, you could choose Disconnect Equipment. I'll select Edit Type in the Properties palette. Revit displays the Type Properties dialog for the piping system. As you can see, the type is currently set to Hydronic Supply. If you want to create additional types, you could select Duplicate. Then you can change parameters for that system type, such as graphic overrides, material, calculations, fluid type, and several rise-drop parameters. For example, for hydronic supply systems, you may have chilled water supply and condenser water supply systems that you want to display differently. I'll click Cancel to close the dialog. In order to see each system in the project, you can look in the System browser. To open the System browser, switch to the View ribbon. In the Windows panel, expand the User Interface drop-down and select the checkbox next to System Browser. This opens the System browser, which is organized in a tree structure. Currently, the view is set to Systems and All Disciplines. However, you could change this to Zones or filter the view by discipline. In the Unassigned branch, you can see that there are several items that have not been assigned to a system. I could continue expanding the branches in order to see the specific items. When an element is placed in the model with some type of connector, it is organized in the System browser under Unassigned, depending on the type of connector. Then once it has been added to a system, it is organized based on the type of system. For example, when I expand the Piping branch, I can then expand the Hydronic Supply branch and see the equipment for the system we just created. When I expand that branch, the system name appears. When I expand the system, each target component appears. The flow and size for each item are also displayed. Realize that when I highlight an element in the tree, it is highlighted in the model. Also, notice that when I select one of these components in the tree, several other branches highlight. This is because the equipment has several other connectors that fall under one of the other categories. Since this is a water source heat pump, there are obviously additional water connections under piping, and the equipment will need power, so there is a power connector under electrical. Additionally, there is a supply and return air connector that is not part of a system. So as you can see, creating systems can become very complex. They should be used for your benefit. However, you do not have to create a system for every single connector. But be aware that when you connect these items together, a system will automatically be created. Now let's create the condenser water return system. I'll select a water source heat pump. Next, on the Create Systems panel, I'll select Piping. Revit displays the Create Piping System dialog. I will choose Hydronic Return for the system type and then name the system CWR for Condenser Water Return. Then I'll click OK. Once again, I'll select Edit System in the contextual ribbon. Revit enters into Edit Piping System mode and I'll select all the water source heat pumps. Since each one has a hydronic return connector as well, they're added to this system. With all the target connectors selected, I'll choose Select Equipment and select the cooling tower again. Finally, I'll click Finish Editing System to create the piping system.